So, if you're deep in your philosophy or political theory studies, you're going to hit one of life's biggest questions. How do we actually find moral rules that work for everyone? Today, we're diving into discourse ethics. It's a really fascinating theory that says the answer isn't hidden away in some ancient text or just inside our own heads. Nope, it's created in the one place we all share, conversation. This is a huge concept for my master, so let's get into it together.
Just think about it for a second. Our world is filled with so many different cultures, different beliefs, different values. How on earth are we supposed to find moral principles that every single person can actually get behind? Is a universal standard even possible? Or is it all just, a matter of opinion? Well, discourse ethics offers a pretty powerful and honestly a really optimistic way forward.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the basics. Then we'll jump back to the philosopher Kant, because his ideas are really the launchpad for this whole theory. Then we'll see how discourse ethics makes this huge shift from a solo act to a group effort. We'll define what a so-called ideal conversation looks like, and finally, we'll see how this all connects back to the messy, real world.
Okay, so let's start right here. What's the big problem discourse ethics is trying to tackle? It's this: how do we land on moral principles that aren't just dictated by some authority, but are rules that every single person they affect can genuinely say yes to? The answer it proposes is, well, we have to talk it out.
And here is the absolute core of it. A moral rule is only legit if, and this is the key part, everyone it touches could agree to it, freely and rationally. It's not enough for a rule to just sound good or seem logical to one person. It has to earn its stripes through actual discussion. Now, the two main architects here, the names you're going to see everywhere in the research, are the German philosophers Jürgen Habermas and Karl Otto Apel.
Now, to really get where Habermas and Apel are coming from, we have to rewind a bit. We've got to go back to the 18th century titan of philosophy they were responding to, Immanuel Kant. His work on ethics is the absolute starting point. It's the foundation that discourse ethics both builds on and then radically tears down and rebuilds. You see, Kant was all about a theory called deontology, which comes from the Greek word for duty. For him, morality isn't about the results of your actions, like whether you make people happy. Not at all. It's about following the right rules, simply because it's your duty to do so. A moral action is right in and of itself, no matter what happens next.
So, how do you figure out these universal rules? Well, Kant gave us this incredibly powerful tool called the categorical imperative. Think of it as a stress test for your actions. First, you take the little rule you're about to follow, your maxim. Let's say it's, I'll lie whenever it gets me out of trouble. Then, step 2, you imagine a world where everybody, all the time, follows that exact same rule. Does it work? Well, if everyone lied all the time, trust would completely evaporate. The very idea of a promise or even truth would become meaningless. The rule eats itself. And so Kant says, lying is morally forbidden. Simple as that.
He also had another way of phrasing his imperative, and this one is maybe even more famous. He said we have to treat all of humanity, in ourselves and in others, always as an end and never just as a means to an end. It's this beautiful, profound statement that every single person has inherent worth and dignity and isn't just a tool for us to use. Okay, this framework is powerful for sure, but here's the catch, the big but that Habermas and Apel spotted. Kant's entire test, the whole thing happens inside one person's head. It's basically a moral monologue, and that's, well, it's risky. What if that one person has blind spots or hidden biases? What if they just can't imagine all the different ways their universal rule might impact other people from different walks of life? And that's the central question. Is one person's private reasoning really enough to build a morality for everyone? And that very question leads us right to the main event, the core innovation of discourse ethics, what's called the discursive turn. Habermas and Apel said, look, to truly test a moral rule, you have to drag it out of the quiet monologue of one person's mind and throw it into a real, live dialogue with everyone it affects. Morality shifts from I think to we agree.
This chart just lays out the shift perfectly. With Kant, you've got one person doing a thought experiment in their head. The risk? Well, their perspective is limited. But with the discursive model, you have all affected people in a real conversation. And this is so important. The basis for morality moves from just individual reason to what Habermas called communicative rationality, basically the shared logic that we build between us when we talk. The goal is no longer just a private conclusion, it's a genuine rational consensus.
Okay, so if conversation is the answer, we've got to make sure we're having the right kind of conversation. This is why discourse ethics is what you'd call a proceduralist theory. It doesn't give you a list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. Instead, it gives you a procedure, a set of rules for how to figure out those morals together. And this whole procedure is built around a concept called the ideal speech situation.
The ideal speech situation, or ISS for short, is basically a thought experiment. It's the set of perfect, gold standard conditions for a rational debate. Imagine a conversation where things like money, power, threats, and manipulation just don't exist. The only thing that has any sway is what Habermas famously called the unforced force of the better argument. It's about finding an agreement that everyone can accept, not because they were pushed into it, but because it actually made the most sense.
So what does this perfect conversation look like? Well, it's got 4 ironclad rules. 1. Total inclusion. Everyone who is affected by the outcome gets a seat at the table, no exceptions. 2. Total equality. Everyone has the same right to speak, to ask questions, to challenge ideas. 3. Total freedom. Nobody can be shut down by force or pressure. And 4. Total sincerity. This is a big one. Everyone has to be there to genuinely find the best answer together, not just to win the debate for their own side.
I know, this can all feel pretty academic and abstract. So let's ground it in a classic thought experiment to see how it works. Picture this. A town's biggest employer is a factory. It provides all the jobs. But it's also polluting the river. That pollution is destroying the crops for farmers who live downstream. Now, if the factory is forced to install super expensive filters, it might go out of business, and everyone in the town loses their jobs. So, what's the right thing to do?
Well, according to that first rule of the ISS, total inclusion, you can't just let the factory owner decide. You have to bring every single person who has a stake in this to the table. That means the owner, of course, but also the workers who need their jobs, the mayor who represents the town, the farmers whose livelihoods are on the line, and you'd probably want to bring in some outside experts, like environmental scientists, to give everyone the hard facts. And this is where the other rules kick in and change everything. The owner can't threaten to shut the factory down to get their way. That violates the no coercion rule. The farmers can't just scream at the workers and ignore their very real fears about unemployment. In this ideal conversation, every argument is weighed on its merits. And maybe, just maybe, through that rational discussion, they discover a compromise. Perhaps there's a cheaper, partially effective filter, and the town can offer a temporary tax break to help pay for it. That solution becomes morally valid because it wasn't forced on anyone. It emerged from a rational consensus of everyone involved.
Okay, at this point, I can practically hear what you're thinking. Come on, this is a complete fantasy. The real world is all about power and money and people looking out for themselves. And you know what? That is the biggest and most powerful critique of discourse ethics. But Habermas and Apel knew this. The ideal speech situation was never meant to be a photograph of reality. It's a guiding star, a critical benchmark we can use to judge our actual conversations.
And Carl Otto Apel came up with this really brilliant 2-part way of dealing with this gap, which he called an ethics of responsibility. Think of it like this. Part A is our reality. It's the messy, imperfect world we live in right now. We have a duty to act responsibly within it, using the laws and systems we have. We can't be naive. But Part B is our goal. We have a simultaneous duty to always be working to make those systems better, to make them more inclusive, more equal, more rational, more like the ideal speech situation. We have to live in Part A, but we must always be striving toward Part B. So let's zoom out. What's the big takeaway here? Why does this theory matter, both for my studies and for how we think about getting along in the real world? What it really boils down to is this. Discourse ethics completely reframes what morality is all about. It yanks it out of the private, quiet space of one person's conscience, that Kantian monologue, and puts it right into the loud, public, messy, dialogical space where we actually have to build a shared world together. The question is no longer, what do I think is right? It becomes, what can we, through respectful dialogue, all agree is just?
And for anyone else studying this, like me, this is your starter pack. These are the key players. Kant sets the stage, and then Habermas and Apel are the main architects of the theory itself. If you're going to read one thing, a foundational text is Habermas's moral consciousness and communicative action. And these are the core concepts you've just got to know, all of them circling around that huge idea of the discursive turn.
So I'll leave you with a question to chew on. If the true test for any law or social rule is that every single person it affects could freely and rationally agree to it, how many of our current obvious rules would actually pass that test? It's a really challenging thought, and it kind of shows that it's on all of us to keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining me.